Hello, my name is Stan Nochasak, and you're listening to Catholic versus Other.
So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, if you would, please. Who you are, what you believe, and how you came to believe what you believe.
I'm Inuit from Newfoundland and Labrador, and I grew up in Nain, Labrador, where I was brought up as Moravian Christian, which is a sect of Pentecost. But underlyingly, you might say unconsciously, I grew up in Inuit culture where our spirituality is based off the land that we carry through. But in terms of acquisition, I grew up and was introduced to the Baha'i faith, and that I practice overtly. But I still hold to the other beliefs.
So Baha'i, as far as I understand, is very open to other religions, right? I think there are 7 religions that they explicitly name that they're open to. Can you confirm that, and can you name what the 7 religions are?
There is a principle called unity in diversity, and there are a prerequisite of unity is diversity, which includes religion, and the major religions in the East, as is written in the Baha'i faith, is Buddha, Moses, Christ, Zoroaster, and Krishna, as far as I can remember now. But there are other religions like native spirituality, and that's not explicitly expressed, but that's what we believe.
Can you just talk about your earliest memories with religion, please?
There's 2 parts to that. On the religious side, you might say, is that my parents are deeply Moravian, like our people, where this sect of Pentecost was introduced to Labrador Inuit from the mid-1600s. That came from Germany, and it was ended up being established along the coast of northern Labrador. And we've been following it ever since. But another side of, I wouldn't say religion, and I would say more spirituality, which forms our Inuit culture, and that's growing up off the land. And you develop a sense of being and identity and belief and a worldview when you grow up off the land. The land is, in natural sense, underlyingly spiritual. And I grew up, my father was a guide, and he used to bring up mountain climbers up in northern Labrador, and there were these mountains that are called Torngat, which in Inuit means place of the spirit. And science says that these mountains are one of the oldest in the world. So when I grew up around them, they, to me, have a sense of an old soul. So I have been affected by that a lot. And the other part, I guess, when I was in my mid-teens, I was introduced through my older sister to the Baha'i faith. And I've been reading about it and been adhering to it ever since.
Was there any negative reaction from your family and friends when you chose to focus on Baha'i?
One of the things I like to believe that when natives like Inuit live off the land for thousands of years, you start becoming part of the land. You start becoming so spiritual that it becomes unconscious. And like when the Moravians came, because Inuit, I would think that they're so spiritual that when they were introduced to the Bible, they recognized the truth in the Bible and they accepted it and embraced it. And this is how my parents reacted to the Baha'i faith. They were open to it, and they were introduced to some of the principles and ideas, and they didn't disagree with it. When I was growing up, I was forced to go to church, and I didn't like that at all. And I already made up my mind that when I was going to be old enough to act on my own choices, that I would never go to church again. And that's what I did. And I didn't want anything to do with the outside world, with school or Shakespeare or speaking English. But as growing up, being influenced from the outside world, you kind of have no choice. And then when I was introduced to the Baha'i faith in the form of a book by Shogar Effendi called God Passes By, his English, his writing was really, really superb, and that really changed changed my my mind and my heart and my outlook about English, and so I start try to read as much as possible and learn about words. And one of the things I like to say that the Inuit culture have their own deity, and she's a sea goddess named Sedna, and she's you might say, the boss of nature, and she's in the mythical legend, she's creator of the sea mammals. And I like to think, well, even outside myself, that before Europeans came, the native beliefs had shared one spirit in this form of culture where we respect elders and have pride in ourselves and have a noble equality and love of children, and respect and care and protection of the land and the animals, and reference to the spirit world and my ancestors. And I try to share that as much as possible, and I think that the world will benefit from it, particularly the West. And you see, the West is more material, and I think that natives around the world, in their own native beliefs, is that they're very spiritual, and so if we come together, we can actually complement and be as helpmates. And the other view is that the messengers of God in the other side of the world were, were mainly men. But if you were a native, you could believe that on this side of the world, the original West, you might say, is that these messengers were female. And I think that overall they were supposed to be equals, like see eye to eye and complement each other, be as helpmates. But where our people's this side of the world was overrun and overwhelmed and subjugated by Christianity and all that it's really hard to believe even today, to not only think about, hard to think about that we have such views, let alone have beliefs. So from my point of view, I try to bring my native beliefs to the present and bring it into the future without any discrimination from Christianity or any other sacred belief.
May I ask how old you are?
I'm 44.
Okay. I'm wondering if you could just talk from your perspective as a middle-aged man about atheism. What is it? Why is it popular today? And what can we do to educate those who deny the very existence of the spiritual, the supernatural, and even of God himself?
I would think that, European Wests they ended up becoming so material that they lost their way. They lost their spiritual way. But the native people on this side, before Europeans came, they kept their spirituality quite strong and rooted. That we keep this path, and we feel we are quite strong about it. And if you are too material, you lose your way. And I think this is what happened to an extent, that not only lose your sense of spirituality, it affects your mind. You see a lot of Westerners, they have problems with their mind, or are mentally challenged, mentally delayed, because their mind is not connected so much with reality anymore. And we, unfortunately, the West has to learn the hard way, the slow way, and painful way to find that original self again.
In your religion, or for you personally, do you think that God is one, or do you think that there are many gods? Can you just explain that from your perspective?
I see it as God, same thing as a creator or a great spirit. It's just like the sun. And the different names of different messengers are like the colors of the sun. They're different, but they come from one source, and that's the God. We weren't used to the word God. We say more creator or great spirit.
I see. How do they reconcile the contradictions that exist, for example, among the different claims about who and what Jesus Christ was, the historical person of Jesus Christ? Because the Muslims claim that he was not God and that he was not crucified, he did not die. And then the Jews claim that he was not the Messiah, but that he did die. And then the Christians claim that he is God, he is the Jewish Messiah, and that he did die for our sins, and he rose again, and he's body and soul in heaven. So there are lots of different contradicting views about Jesus Christ, just in those three religions, not to mention if we bring in Buddhism and all sorts of other worldviews. So how does the Baha'i faith sit comfortably among all these different contradictions?
There's a Baha'i principle called progressive revelation, and the Baha'i faith claims that the different major religions around the world came at different times for specific reasons every 1,000 years. So Buddha and Christ and Muhammad and Moses, they all came at different times, about 1,000 years apart each. And when they came with new set of social laws. I mean, the spirituality, the basis is always the same, but to externally, socially express it, new laws were placed. And these laws, social laws that from these different religions, they appear to contradict or nullify each other or are indifferent to each other. But overall, there are about different periods and different times that would suit according to the capacity and sensitivity of humanity at the time. It's almost like going from family unit to tribe to city-state. You need to apply different practical rules for different stages according to what's being manifest.
I want to change gears a little bit here now and talk about evil, the problem of evil. What do you think evil is? Does it have any substance or reality, or is it just a lack of goodness? This is what the Catholic Church teaches, that evil just is a falling away from being, a falling away from reality, a falling away from goodness, because God, like you said, is that one source of everything that's good. So that's the Catholic perspective on evil. It doesn't have any substance. Is that your understanding, your Baha'i and your general understanding of evil?
Baha'i faith says that there is no evil in nature, but I guess Adam and Eve, they were housed from the good tree, and there was evil, and there was sin. There's been evil, but in the Baha'i faith, they say that goodness is relative. It's almost like mathematics. It goes from 1 to infinity, like 1 compared to 2, maybe less or evil, or maybe 1 to 10. 1 appears evil or bad or less, and 10 is better, but it's all relative. And it's like a person who could be having a hard time and not make a right moral choice, but he has some goodness, and everybody is born pure and noble. It's how you grow up that makes a difference. But overall, goodness is evil. They also say that evil is the absence of good, and good is absence of evil, or that light is absence of darkness, and darkness is absence of light. But overall, there's no real evil. It's really relative how good you are.
What is the afterlife like for the Baha'i religion?
I like to use the analogy of what First Nations or Native people have been using for thousands of years, is that they see this world, the physical world, as an expression of the spirit world. Like this world is like a womb, the mother's womb. And when we're in the physical mother's womb, we grow arms and legs and eyes and so on in a very perfectly organized way, so that when we're born into this world, we can live, we can walk, we can see, we can explore. And that's the same thing in the First Nations view, Native view, is that this world is like a womb, but a spiritual womb where we are to acquire, and the purpose is to acquire virtues, compassion, care, spirituality, and prayerfulness. And when we acquire this, like children acquire these things through playfulness, and adults learn this through hardship. And when we learn what hardship overall, we start becoming stronger and better people. And then when we die physically, we carry what we learned and what we acquired into the next world, to the spirit world. And that's why Native people always try to, and it's shared in the Baha'i faith, that We here to grow spiritual eyes, spiritual ears, spiritual arms, and that spiritual way, so that we can carry it into the next world and be born whole, so to speak.
Mm. In the next life, do you envision being reunited with dead family members and stuff like that?
Absolutely. They just physically died. They didn't. Their soul is it's very much still alive, like nothing had happened or been affected. Like you have a mirror, your face is the sun, and the sun light reflects in the mirror, but the sun is like the soul or the light that goes in the mirror, and the mirror is like the physical being. It reflects the spirituality or the holiness. But when the mirror is broken, the sun is not destroyed, or the light is still there. Or you might say that a bird in the cage, the bird may represent the spirit, and the cage may represent the physical part. When the cage is broken or open, it doesn't affect the bird, it doesn't affect the soul. It's set free.
Now, what you're saying reminds me of this ancient religion of Gnosticism, where they claimed that the spirit is good and the body is evil, and all material substances are evil relative to the spirit. Is this what you hold to?
Yeah, I think that life is all about from a single point is progression. We go from rock to plant to animal to human, and our next step is spirit, and we're learning to acquire that. And when we are going too attached to the material side, it's like we're trying to go backwards when we're supposed to be going forward. And if we're going too attached to the material, then we say that is evil. It's not good. But if we make progress and try to be detached from the material side, which in its pure form is not bad, it's just we need to try and set our soul free by acquiring spirituality or holiness.
What about the question of suicide? Is it evil? And if so, why? For the Catholic Church, it's evil. It's one of the worst evils.
I don't think we're supposed to kill ourselves. I think it's supposed to be the sole responsibility of the Creator. He knows, or she knows, or it knows, or His unknowable essence knows best what's best for us. And if we commit suicide, it's like we're going against the will of the Creator. But the Creator, you can say, is all merciful, all forgiving, and all compassionate. We make mistakes, and there are different reasons why there's suicide, and it's complicated and sensitive. And I have a few ideas, but those are my own, and people have their own. But overall, I think we're supposed to, as much as possible, follow the will of the Creator.
Yeah. This brings me to the idea of an eternal hell from which you cannot escape ever. What do you make of this Catholic doctrine, and what is your point of view?
I'm going to say, too, that in our language, in Inuit language, there is no word for devil. And in the Baha'i faith, there is no evil. Hell is a relative term for heaven. There's no really hell. It's all relative to what is heaven. Like if you're attached to this world too much, that's not good. So you may say that is hell. But if you're set free, there's more expression of heaven as opposed to expression of hell.
Now, the question that arises when we talk about hell is about morality. If there is no difference in outcome for any two humans, regardless of the choices that they make, if both of them will be guaranteed to end up in heaven eventually, then there is, by definition, no morality whatsoever. You can literally do what you want, and you will still end up in heaven because it's the only reality. Heaven is the only reality. Whereas in my religion, Catholicism, you can make bad choices that will lead to an outcome, a permanent outcome, which is horrible. We call it hell. It's a separation from truth and goodness and beauty and everything and life and God himself. So morality depends on having a permanent hell. What do you say?
Originally, like I said, we were born pure and noble, and including that is morality. And morality overall is supposed to serve the spirit. Morality is supposed to serve the sacred. Like we're tested. Our morality is tested for a purpose, for divine reason, to show that, to learn what is behind the hardship. Why are we having hardship? And overall, it's the Creator trying to teach us something. Like if we make a mistake, and everybody makes mistakes, like a child, he's going to walk the road, and sometimes he's going to fall over and scratch his knee, but he has to get up and keep on going. And you can see in his vision, so you know where you're going. It's good to have an immediate plan in front of you, so you know where you're going, and put those two together. But sometimes those don't coincide all the time, so we waver and we fall. But the idea is to get up and keep going, and things will get better.
But you admit that in your worldview, everyone ends up in heaven eventually? Absolutely.
People need no fear, no shame. It's like being born into this world. When we were in our mother's womb, everything was very, very limited and dark, and didn't know about the next world. Had no idea, no comprehension, no imagination, nothing really. It was a real small sense of it, like a mother's voice, and calling, loving voice, and it sounded like a voice within yourself, and calling to say, "This is better that you make this choice." And when you're into the next world, like in the spirit world, it's like everything is greater, into spaces and brighter, and there's different things and maybe different creatures. I don't know. Like here, we didn't know when we was in our mother's womb, we didn't know about plants and animals and sky, and when we're in the spirit world, we might discover other things we never knew that it could exist, and make it more beautiful.
What about abortion? Is abortion permissible for you?
And I think, in the Baha'i faith, it says we try to veer from abortion as much as possible, but sometimes there are circumstances that can't be helped, and it's not the fault of the woman. Like maybe she was raped, and she has the right conscious choice to whether or not she wants to keep the baby, or that maybe she's extremely mentally ill and she can't take care of herself or take care of the baby. Maybe the baby can be born and taken away, but it's under extreme circumstances that abortion is allowed and okay.
And there's a connected idea, which is the morality of sexuality. What is sexuality for you, and what is the morality that's connected with sexuality?
Sexuality is supposed to be an expression of carrying on life, on creating more creation, and that is expressed in the form of sex, which is very, very sacred and very, very deep and very, very intimate and very, very sacred. And when it's guided in the right way, it can be expressed very beautifully. Like when people, like the physical side is in overall, categorically a counterpart of the spirit. And when we express ourselves physically, we're expressing a sense of spirit. And when we express the physical side more properly, then the spirit or holiness is expressed a lot more.
Can you just tell me a little bit about your day-to-day spiritual life? How do you pray, and what kinds of prayer do you engage in?
As a Native person, like in the West, like if you have a problem, you go to a psychiatrist or a counselor or stuff like that, go in the office and talk about it, and that's maybe a form of healing. But my form of healing as a Native person is following my culture, going to elders, talking to them. I have a Inuit drum in Inuit. It's called a khilaut, and it's very sacred to us, and it's hollow and deep and beautiful and sacred and clear, pristine, and it resonates. I think it naturally resonates with the soul, and like every other Native have their own sacred beliefs, and they express it with their own instruments. They have their own drum, they have their own ceremonies and rituals and circles, healing circles. these are forms of healing for me. So I think about, I try to think about these things on a daily basis and try to promote it to the world as much as possible. And like for me personally, I have an affinity for crows, and crows are more like my spirit sign. It's not unusual for natives to have what they call a helping spirit. And it could be expressed as symbols like a certain animal. Mine is like, I think is crow. So I carry crow feather on my chest. Is to me equivalent to a Christian cross. And as a Baha'i, we have a certain explicit ordinances, like we read the writings in the morning and the evening, and we say a prayer at least once a day. And we recently, since 2000, we repeat the word inspiration. It's Alaupa, which means thou glory is, and we repeat it 9 to 5 times. And that's part of my daily living. But overall, I'm just like any other person. I'm a human being, but I am more attached to Inuit because we're akin to each other, have an understanding of our history. But I love meeting people and making friends and talking to people and become more educated and smiling, whatever. It's just being simple.
How do you deal with aggressive people and people that are angry? What is your method for that?
I just treat them with nobility. Like there's a word in Inuit, sometimes in our language, an Inuit word has more than one meaning. It can have 2 meanings or nuances of different meanings. And one of them, to me, is like there's various words for spirit, and one of them is sabuk, and it also means final identity. Overall, when we look at a person, overall, in the end, we're going to be the same. We have a soul, we are noble, we are free, we have free will. And I think part of an attribute of Inuit today or Native people today is that they become so spiritual over 1,000 years that it's become a bit unconscious. So spirituality keep a sense of nobility, and so walk around with sense of warmth and meekness. And when people naturally respond to that, when people have a light, they're attracted to the light. And if it's intense, it's all good. If it's a little, it's okay. But overall, people in the end are the same.
Can you talk a little bit about the arts, music, visual art, dance? How important is that for ritual and for connecting with the spiritual?
I find it very interesting that you could say the other side of the world is more, let's say, scientific or material, and on this side it's more spiritual and artistic. I think their importance is on the same level. It's just how they're expressed that are different. Like it's really odd. Like when I'm, let's say, telling a story or sharing a lesson, a native lesson or a teaching, they say that it sounds like a poem. Well, that sounds like a story, but I don't really think in those terms. I just express what I've been taught and what I feel, and they say it's art, and so be it. And if they say it's science or whatever, so be it. But it's a facet of truth, and the truth is one. It's just how it's expressed.
Can you just talk about suffering? What does it mean? What is the spiritual meaning of suffering for you, and how should you best approach personal suffering?
That's the thing. Any hardship has a spiritual meaning overall, or at its basis, or in its original self. And when it's expressed properly, like people have different problems, like you said, addictions, or they have cancer, or they have they fell down and broke their back, and all these hardships and suffering has overall purpose. Like destiny always has a reason. And we may not see it in the immediate sense, and we might react to it badly. Sometimes it's due to this new age where there are a new set of problems that we haven't been introduced to, and maybe we're not so used to resolving them because it's new. Or, it's all a learning process, and you can't make any real discrimination from one problem to another.
Have you been overwhelmed by suffering at any point in your life where you lost touch with your spiritual principles?
I wouldn't say that I lost it. Like like I said earlier, my dad used to bring me up to these mountains, and I had an old soul, and I carried it ever since. And in native world, you might say, is that we have a sense of being that's whole and spiritual, but the world is not like that. It's not humanly perfect. When I came to St. John's, 1994. It was almost like a whole new world to me. And things were bigger, faster, louder, and more material. But socially, it was much more isolating. And I never, I don't suffer from clinical depression, but I've suffered from social depression. Like, the world here is very different. Like, you don't know your neighbors, you don't say hi to people on the road, you don't see children playing around, you don't have, people don't think spiritually, you're not connected to the nature. And so this is the kind of suffering that I've been going through, but it doesn't mean that my spirituality and my soul is gone. It's just that it was put in a different situation where I couldn't be expressed as much. Like, I felt I was on a spiritual path by myself, and that nobody was walking with me, and so that gave me a hardship.
What role does education play? Can we teach children and young adults, and even full-grown adults, to change their way of thinking?
I think the soul it always naturally knows where to go. But if we don't pay attention to it, we start to get lost. And the soul is always trying to find its compass point. Everything in nature has a direction, and it's perfect. It knows where to go, and it's growing by itself through the Creator. When we don't follow that road, we get lost and we get hurt. And when you are connected to that original self with your soul or your spirit, then you start to find your way. And it could be as simple as making a right choice. The choice can be very hard to make, or saying that don't go to this person, don't go to that person, don't do this, don't do that. And it's up to us whether or not, to our free will, whether or not we're going to do it. Something that's hard to do. Overall, we can be guided on a daily basis, moment to moment, whether you're a child or an elder, it doesn't matter. We have, as long as in this world, we have an opportunity to grow on a holy basis or a spiritual basis. We're not left alone. Like, nature cannot leave itself alone and cut off itself from the Creator. It's just impossible. It's the same with humanity and with morality.
In your native culture, is there pressure to marry, to have children, to have grandchildren, and this sort of thing? And if so, have you felt that pressure? And what's your love life been like?
In Inuit culture, we have a very strong bond, social bond, underlying bond, and we value everyone. Everyone has a role. There's a structure to our culture, and everyone has a role. And the family unit is very good expression of it, but not necessarily there was pressured on me. It would be nice and to have a wife, to have children, and so on, but it's not prearranged like before. The world has changed, so we're open to different stuff. But like the word Inuit means the people. It doesn't matter who we are.
How important is the family unit to the psychological and spiritual health of people in the West, people that don't have a firm tradition of the elders and the wisdom of the elders and connection to the land? How important is that family unit? Because it seems to be breaking down with divorce and contraception and abortion and all these sorts of pressures.
I guess the family unit could be expressed in not like in so much traditional sense like how it was in the old world order, but the new world order is being learned, and what definition of family unit is changing or being renewed. And it's connected to everything pretty much. Like we say that the family unit is a miniature nation, and see everything natural is progressive, and it can start with the family, but it grows from there.
What are dreams? Do they have any spiritual significance for you and your worldview?
Personally, yeah, they come. It's a proof of beside a world besides this one that maybe between the physical and the spirit world. It's kind of a connection, like a reflection of top of the water, reflecting light, and you see it from the bottom, and you see it in what comes to the surface of the sea is what you see from the bottom. And however it reflects maybe a certain message, a specific message for you to acquire, and like certain light develops plants in the ocean, certain plants, so it starts growing towards it in form of learning. Like personally, when I was young, my dreams were only sounds, in the dark, and I asked the Creator to honor myself through honoring the Creator to have through dreams. So my dreams started becoming visible in black and white, and then colors start coming, and noise became more acute, and the colors became more visible, and it became so vivid that I could almost like will myself to a wakeful state if I needed to. But I do value dreams in a very spiritual way, because I think that's another way of connecting to the Creator, even when you're asleep. And it's almost the lessons could be even more clearer than when you might learn in the day-to-day life, because you're not hindered by this world, you're not affected by it, you're detached, your body is not, it's in inert state, but your soul is still active, and your soul is open and vulnerable, whether you like it or not, and because it's a way for the Creator to get in touch with you, to learn certain things through hardship, or certain images, and that comes in the form of dreams.
What about fasting? Does the Baha'i religion or the native spirituality recommend abstaining from food during certain periods of the week or the month or the year?
Native people have a very strong attachment to the belief of having fasts when you're on a spiritual quest. Like in Conn River, they have a powwow once a year, and there's no alcohol or illicit drugs allowed on the powwow grounds, and they do have sweat lodges, and they encourage and promote fasting. It's a form of purging, get away from being attached to material things too much, in a way to purify your body and to get more in touch with your spirit, to commune with it. In the Baha'i sense, they do have like a month of fasting. It's a time before the Baha'i New Year, which starts on the first day of spring, and a month, you might say, but it's controlled fasting in the sense that people do not consume anything from sunrise to sunset. But after that, you can eat and drink water, and a month in the Baha'i calendar is 19 days. So people who are Baha'is are encouraged to have a fast, but again, guided. Like people who are too old, they're not encouraged necessarily to have a fast, or a lady who is pregnant, or someone who's sick, or a child. The age of mature is 15, and between 15 and I think it's 75. I'm not sure. But fasting is holy and sacred and encouraged.
Do you have sacred books, or one sacred book, or do you revere the Bible or the Quran, or both, or what? Can you talk a little bit about sacred books, holy books?
I went to a presentation, a seminar, where different religions gave presentations on different views, and there was one chief, First Nations chief, and he said that he's never had a Bible in his life, but that the only Bible he knew of is the one he was standing on. So we see creation as analogy to the Bible is equally sacred and holy. But for me personally, like I go to the Baha'i writings a lot, not so much on a religious quest, like not out of exclusive doctrine or whatever, but more to learn how to express myself, like to have spiritual views and I really take to it, and also just to learn English because their writing is you could say impeccable in different ways and different levels. So I try to learn English to express myself as much as possible.
Is your own native language flourishing and growing, or is it on its way out, or does it go up and down?
All of the above. But overall, it's progressing with technology. We have outlets where we can have it recorded. And it needs to be recorded as much as possible because it's an ancient language and there's old wisdom, and it could be taught by elders. And we're able to learn, the youth are able to learn through this technology. But overall, where people are becoming more expansive and united, it's becoming better.
Are you fluent in your native tongue?
I have basic ability to express it outwardly, but I know it's more intuitively than on a technical level because like other native people, they didn't have computers or calculators or tape recorders. We're learning through oral observation and listening, and so we pass it on from one mind to another, one heart to another. So we get more of a feel for it and we carry it through our personality. It's more unconscious and the way you behave day to day.
So always at the end of my interviews, I always like to ask my guests to give a little positive message of hope. So just to wrap up the interview, what do you think you might be able to say to anyone that might be out there listening now?
I'm a storyteller and a drum dancer and a painter and actor and so on. But one of the things I really find invaluable is a story about the first Inukshuk. And I don't know if you want to know what an Inukshuk is. It is a pile of rocks that looks like a person on top of a hill. And it's like used for guidance to give you direction where home is, where people are, where the animals are. Those are practical reasons, but there's also a mythical legend behind it, and the story overall, how the Inukshuk came to be, is that it ended up being a symbol and a reminder of the spirit. But I also want, and I can send you the story by email or share it another time for your podcast, because it can be a long story, but overall, with the Inukshuk is a symbol of creation. When you attach the mythical, the legendary side being a symbol and reminder of spirit, I'm trying to say is that the Inukshuk is not made of just one size, one shape. They use different kind of rocks, big rocks, small rocks, doesn't matter. They're all very equally important. And it's like a young or old person, a male, female, and so on. Like each rock has a role, and when they come together, united with their differences, and when they come together with their noble soul, they can form a sacred circle or a structure. You have a big boulder, you see it from afar, but when you look close, there's a pebble that's holding up the boulder. So all these little big incisors of rocks is like a symbol of everybody, whether you're young or old, rich or poor, white or black, and we all have a role. We're all important. We're all here for a reason, and we're all equally important, and that will last forever. And when we remember that, we know where we come from, where we stand, where we can go, and we can feel proud of who we are. And be united, not be afraid of each other, because overall, this is kind of an ironic thing that I think that humanity is the only creature in the universe or creation is divided, not only divided against nature, but unto itself. And so try to remind that, we have a place in the world, and it's just all important. Bumidi Kobayashi Buyuk, Nakamit Chuangai, Elenasin, Nalaguit the Mat, Be Hatit, Kamitsi Hatit. I'm just saying that my heart is happy and I'm thankful and I love you all and I hope you do good and take care of yourself.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you've got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.